Hello friends, in today's video we are going to talk about technocracy. If you remember, I posted a YouTube video about plutocracy. It is on YouTube. You can find it, just write plutocracy and my name and you will find the video. And I talk about living in a social system that is actually plutocracy. Pardon? What means the rule of the power of money and fear. And in that video, I warned everyone that we do not live in any democracy by any chance. Since the current self-proclaimed rulers of the world are announcing the transition to a new form of government, and since this is indeed possible after Pluto enters the sign of Aquarius in the year 2023, then here we will talk what it would look like if the world really gradually moved to a technocratic form of government and what it means in general. So what is technocracy? I would like to get involved, I would not like to get involved in all possible definitions here, but let's say according to some it is, I quote, the theory according to which the measure of energy would be applied in the organization of the economy. And scientific facts would be applied in all branches of life, so the welfare of the people will be tenfold. I don't know about you, but for me, this definition is really funny. There is another definition. This is from British Encyclopedia. It's a dangerous definition. They say that the plutocracy is an ideological system in which those who possess scientific and technological knowledge have the right to decide. And we are very, very close to that, I would say, according to that how we live in today's time. So we can take in account here the eternal distinction in philosophy between episteme, which means knowledge, and techne, which means craft or art. And if we go into that analysis, we will also learn something. Maybe not much, because this techne we use today in technique, technology, and so on. But still, this distinction is very interesting, because if we speak about technocracy, that it means that some techne rules, and techne is not a real knowledge, it is something like a method. It means that the method dominates, not the essence. It means that the method dominates, not the knowledge. So remember this, please, for the future analysis we are going to have here. And let me also remind you that in this technocracy, this cracy is coming, the second part of the word is coming from Greek word kratio, and this means to rule. So the question is, does that mean that a machine should rule in social life? Does this mean that a machine or a computer should rule a human being? Yes, of course. That's exactly what that means. And why would that be, you would ask? Well, because people unknowingly allow it. We allow it. Does that mean if a machine or computer rules, then the man is in the hands of the machine? Yes, of course. And the machine determines his life, you would ask? Yes, that's right. Everything is according to a technocratic system. Everything is decided by the machine and the man is subordinated to it. So is that the goal of a human life and development? If you ask me, it's not. Does this mean that the laws of human spiritual development cease to apply? In my opinion, that does not mean that any universal laws cease to be valid, but it means the end of humanity and abolition of man. Technocracy as a form of government in some form already exists in today's China. Many could hardly wait to hear that China is the one that reduces people to robots, that eternal communist country that does not know anything about human rights. But it is not the case. That's not the case at all. It is quite different. Since I lived in China, since I know and I love China, I also know that almost everything in China was opposite from that, how they represented China in the West, but that's not important now. Now for us it's important to explain the current situation in China and why these current Chinese allowed themselves to be controlled by computers. The answer to that question the answer first of all to the question where from this modern technology comes the Chinese have today, the answer is not in their discipline and their intelligence, but the modern technology was introduced mainly from America, because China was chosen for the experiment of a technocratic society, and they're only at the beginning of this experiment. Anyone today can find information that technology was imported into China, and that's because the President Trump administration has filed the most serious charges so far against representatives of the so-called deep state for abusing technology and discoveries that were of the highest national interest, for abusing them against humanity, and also for smuggling them into China. And also now we can find that it's on the internet, and we know that this is not just a fiction. So what is happening in today's China, many do not know. Namely, the Chinese are monitored and evaluated, and at every moment of their life, based on whether they do a socially useful or shameful act. Even if they do something, their kids are punished or their grandkids will be punished and so on. You can find info about that. I'm not going to talk about that in details. For me, it is quite clear how come the Chinese betrayed to accept such system. First of all, the Confucian philosophy worked in them, which was of course abused and interpolated into the system that now exists, because they wanted to be like judged by society. This is Confucian way of thinking. But of course, huge sums of money were used for this project, as they call it. And of course, this money comes from the stolen resources that are stolen from us, from people who live on this earth. And unfortunately, today's Chinese people are obsessed with money. That's how that happened. It is worth mentioning here that robotization of man and transhumanism are phenomena and philosophies that appear in our time, and that they are part actually of this technocratic system. And also you can study that on the internet. I will mention it only shortly. There are books about that, and there are many notions that are explained in those books and in articles that are on internet. But let's briefly say what transhumanism is as an intellectual movement, because it appears to be a part of technocracy, a potential modern form of government. So what is transhumanism? Transhumanism is committed to improving human mental and physical abilities with the help of modern technology in various ways, including the elimination of unnecessary human conditions such as stupidity, suffering, illness, aging, and unwanted death. I leave to you to think about what a man would look like if scientists or computer programs would remove all that makes him a human being and what leads him towards growth. And what would happen if some of this idea would become reality? So you think of that. I think it's disgusting, but you can think of that, whether that is good or bad. Let me just remind you that now we do not live in some sort of a form of a norm as a normal human beings, some sort of life that is acceptable for a normal human being. We live under the pressure of the terror of current plutocrats. So it's not about going from a normal to abnormal. We are being stolen as a humanity, because power, money, and knowledge, what's the most important, are in the hands of plutocrats who want to continue to rule with the help of machines and to keep codes and knowledge they have for their own. I also remind you that there is no reason to be against modern technology that can certainly improve human life. It's not the problem of technology, it is the problem of a certain type of technology. And it's not the problem to accept new technology, but it is a problem to remove hard capitalists, colonialists, and cruel rulers who want to use hidden knowledge and technologies against humanity. So a man who feels he has been destroyed by greedy and evil plutocrats may even want someone to save him from diseases, from suffering, from death, and so on, but he will be greatly mistaken, because the money for conducting experiments modern technocrats receive from the current plutocrats. These are essentially the same people who invented all this. The human person cannot even imagine this. For example, the human person cannot imagine the attempt to adapt a man to the machine, that this attempt actually to adapt man to a machine failed, and that's why they want to connect, to chip people and to connect them to antennas and to satellites and to robotize a man. Human person cannot even imagine this. This is something that cannot be imagined by a spiritual person either. And this is done, the whole project is done by hard materialists who are hidden in many ideologies, in many religions, and in many movements of the world today. And we are getting closer to the core of our story. So let's look now which symbols from astrology or from which mythological characters we can take to explain the concept of technocracy. The technocratic spirit in astrology is symbolized by the planet Uranus and the sign in which Uranus rules, and this is the sign of Aquarius. There are other symbols also, but we will stay with this to make it simple. So what do we learn from ancient mythology? We learn about the famous myth of the Uranus deity that appeared after the primordial chaos. Although Uranus meant the azure and the beauties of the stars in the sky, this myth also, in other interpretations, which are probably younger of origin, explains Uranus. It is explained also in a different way. Since the celestial wheel is constantly turning, it is possible that Aquarius and Uranus also once met the supreme principle of creation, everything that is on earth, which in our time is attributed to the sign Leo that stands opposite to Uranus. However, in our time, Uranus is, as ruler of Aquarius, means something completely else, and that's how we are going to interpret it. Just to tell you that our astrology, today's astrology, is different than most probably was in the past. No, hard to say when in the past. So we are now going to talk about Uranus and astrology as we know it in today's classical astrology. And this astrology uses mythology to understand astrological symbols. Okay, so Uranus gave birth to children with his mother and wife Gaia. but all his numerous children were monsters, and they were called Titans. Since he hated his children because of their appearance, he threw them all into the hell after birth, or according to another version of the myth, threw them deep into the earth. That is to say, he returned them back to the mother that bore them. According to that version of the myth, Gaia grounded under the burden of her children, and in order to get rid of the trouble, she forged a sickle and helped the youngest son, Kronos, to castrate his father. Then, in the battle called Titanomachy, the second generation of gods emerged, and Uranus was overthrown. So this myth has a rich symbolism and many interpretations, but it is important for us now to notice several phenomena. For example, it is important to see this myth talks about the problem of birth and procreation, and also talks about the problem of accepting one's creation. So now I will explain this myth through the archetype of Aquarius and Uranus, but don't take that's what I'm going to talk about too personally. So it is known in astrology that many people, especially women, who have planets or some points in horoscope in Aquarius or very strong Aquarius or Uranus in a strong position, that they do not have or they don't want to have children. It is also known that same elements of horoscope prevent people from being creative or from that to creatively realize themselves, because they feel as they were constantly in front of the public and they try very hard to make everything they do perfectly, hoping that it will be accepted by others. Uranus or Aquarius in the dominant position in horoscope make people to be perfectionists even. And perfectionists cannot enjoy their creations freely, because they are not focused on themselves, they are focused on others and the acceptance of others. Also, this type of people want to look perfect. So it is characteristic for them to keep a diet and constantly improve their appearance with medications, with makeup, or even with surgery. Most of these people, especially women who have anorexia or bulimia, I do not pronounce this well in English, I know, sorry about that, also have these constellations. So why? Because they don't feel love in themselves. In Aquarius, the sun is in its fall, and the sun is a symbol of divine love. And now, how does a man who has sun in a strong position functions? For example, someone has sun in Leo or many planets in Leo, or sun in the first house or something like that. Well, this person is quite the opposite from that what we explained before. This person creates from his heart because he loves everything he does, and it does not matter what other thinks about him or his work. He creates because that brings him joy, and he often adores his work, himself, his children, and so on. And he doesn't care if it's perfect or not. It's important that it's fun, that it's his. So many people would say that such people are egoists. Maybe they can be also. That's true, but that's not the point at the moment. So these people, as they love themselves, so that's how they love their creation. So the perfectionist and creative person are two antipodes. And the biggest difference between them is that the former does not feel the divine voice within himself, which is the same as love, while the later feels it in his heart, and this connection with God allows him to love and create freely. I hope this is clear. So on the other hand, there is something very good for us and for Aquarius and Uranus. It's not that we are going to describe only some sort of negative things. We don't speak about negative. This is the characteristic of the archetype. But let's say now this would be positive. So what would that be? People who have Aquarius and Uranus in a strong position, they're caring for the society they live in. They're selflessly involved in some social issues. They're fighting for the equality of all. They're advocating socialism, liberalism, and brotherhood. Aquarius is also a symbol of science, scientific discoveries, modern and avant-garde ideology and technologies. And they're inventing many new things for all of us. Nowadays, there are many such scientists who are obsessed even with innovations, and they want to use them immediately, regardless of whether the world or a man is ready for it or not. Often such an avant-garde scientist insists that new technologies be applied by thinking that it will be good for all, and then he falls into a total utopia, as was the case during communism, for example, and many other systems that we know. So what is the dark side of Aquarius, or his shadow, or of Uranus? As with all other signs, the shadow is always what we least expect. This archetype of humanity easily falls into scientism and technocracy, and then science or machine becomes more important than a human being. Although he started as a humanist, I guess that's how you say in English, at the end he turned out to be someone who does not like people. People are imperfect to him. They are not perfect as machines are. They have emotions and they have their diseases and their madnesses, and by having that, they stop the progress of humanity. And they stop the realization of bold scientific visions. Since the shadow part of Aquarius does not love people because of their imperfection, this part of him also does not love himself because he himself is imperfect also. So the shadow of Aquarius is actually a robotized human being. A significant myth that we often mention about together with Aquarius is the myth of Prometheus, who was Titan himself. What did Prometheus do according to mythology? He stole the fire from the gods and gave the fire to human beings. This is a myth that Nikola Tesla commented on by saying that there is something strange in this story. He wondered, why would someone steal fire and lightning from gods when there is so much of that in the space? And of course, Tesla's work speaks of humanity of a completely different kind. His science is in the service of human beings, but he respects nature and divine law at the same time. As a spiritual scientist, Tesla knew that fire should not be stolen but used freely. So what does Prometheus do what is different from Tesla? Prometheus sees himself as a humanitarian because in a way he sacrificed himself for humanity. So he is humanitarian in some his way, but he is also arrogant because he opposes to the God will. And there is a lot of that in the technocratic system that is introduced to us partly in today's time. Uranus is further known as the planet of revolution. It can be political, scientific, or technical revolution. Uranus is always somehow present when changes and big upheavals suddenly occur. Although mythology has known about this archetype since ancient times and described it in various ways, the so-called Western science discovered the planet Uranus in the year 1781, shortly before the French Revolution, and that's of course significant. Of course, Uranus was very strong in the year 1917 when the Russian Revolution broke out. Then in that time Uranus was in Aquarius, which is a very strong position of Uranus. So let us only stay in those two examples, and let's remind ourselves that in both of those two revolutions, the king was killed, and the king is the highest ruler, and as such is a symbol of sun on earth. So in both of revolutions, symbolically, the sun was killed, and which is actually life, symbolically speaking. So if we want to know what is happening to us now, we can learn a lot from the example of Russian Revolution. Let's take that as an example. It's closer to us. As we know, it was the time of mass culture, mass POC, they called it like that, the time of industrialization, when they say that in huge industries they can produce everything for everybody, everybody will be equal, and man can do everything himself. He does not need God. It was great utopia, when priests and believers were massively punished and expelled. Since I was engaged in avant-garde art and literature for one period of my life, and that flourished especially in the period of 1910 and from 1910 to 1920, I noticed that many buildings were named Urania, and they often also spoke about Promethean struggle, you know. And I found in an article that was where Lenin was described, where spiritual people saw Lenin, of course, as Antichrist and the greatest evil, and they say about him that he had mania of God-hating titanism. You know, it's very significant, and it's repeating now only in the West. These are our theses, but let's move on. There are more things to say. The question is, of course, whether is the so-called era of Aquarius, if you accept that something like era of Aquarius is coming. So if it is coming, do we must fall into the horror of technocratic social order or not? And the answer, of course, is not. This is only, as we explained, the shadow of Aquarius. This is one of his worst versions. That can be much better, of course. Self-proclaimed rulers of today's time, they know that this era of Aquarius is associated with network structures. And characteristics of them are spontaneity, aimlessness, self-sustainability, self-creation, freedom, and unpredictability. And that terrifies today's plutocrats. Imagine if these are characteristics of a new system that should naturally come with a change of the vibration of our planet, then how desperate they are. If that system that is to come cannot be controlled, how desperate they must be. And what is left for them but to join the technocrats with the hope that they will adapt to the system and master it. So within them there is a basic misunderstanding of that what is coming, because what is coming is impossible to control. It is only possible to control the events in a virtual and simulated reality, which is one version of the world of Aquarius. But normal life and the future life of humanity is not possible to control. So this technocratic version of life actually abolishes life. if you want to find out what are the ideas behind the possible future rule of the machine, find out on the internet what the representatives of technological transhumanism are saying and doing. You will find them with the antennas that are part of their head. You know, they use surgery to put them in their head, you know. They're not on their head, they're part of their bodies. They are chipped also. They program themselves. They use different instruments to change their way, how they see colors, how they dream. You know, they put usual different instruments on their beds to measure their dreams. They're measuring themselves constantly. And these kind of things, you know, you can find this on the internet. I'm not going to speak about that now. But the whole situation is even much worse than we said so far. So look where the new antennas for the high-speed internet are placed, and you will see that in many cities and countries around the world, trees have been cut down. Let me remind you that the forests of Amazon and Australia were on fire purposely, and that they are every day using these chemtrails, as they call them, that HARP is changing our climate, that they are sending artificial clouds every day, and those clouds are full with heavy metals, as it is found, that there are many strange clouds and artificial things in the sky and in the air, and that they speak about geoengineering as a normal thing. They also speak about human engineering, and they are bringing or importing people from Eastern countries into Europe. That's what is happening to us now. So let's ask, does someone who cuts down forests and dusts man and nature with poison, does that someone loves man and nature? Of course not. Does he respect man and nature? Of course not. Does he respect God and universal divine laws? Of course not. So what does he love or respect? Most probably nothing. Everything that happens to us is projected by this new engineer with some goal of his own. And this his goal an ordinary person cannot understand at all. Technocracy is another great, perhaps the greatest utopia, born of materialists, from materialists. From one who does not understand the meaning of a spirituality or the meaning of human existence on earth at all. So what does a modern technocrat intend to do? While he talks about health and prosperity for all, and the improvement of health and living conditions. And when he talks about long life of the man, about immortality even, he destroys nature. He speaks about chipping a man. He speaks about changes of human consciousness and robotization of humans. He spreads death through air by talking about the immortality of a man. And the basic problem is that he does not love himself, and he doesn't love God either. According to some, soon everything will be regulated by one omnipotent supercomputer, which will of course replace God. According to their visions, everything will be controlled and no mistakes or weaknesses will appear anywhere. Since the computer and even artificial intelligence cannot create anything, it can only combine, yes, what is inserted in this system. Then this form of government implies the end of creativity and, of course, everything that is alive and everything that is life-giving. Creativity is replaced here by combinatorics. Of course, they want to believe that their artificial intelligence creates something, but it does not create anything. The attitude towards children is here very interesting. Towards children and fertility, as we saw from the mythos. So how this technocratic social system sees children and fertility? In this system, there is no fear of death, and there is no fate in life. Before and now, children were very important because we see that, for example, if I don't live anymore, but my children remain after me, so the life goes on. That's how we understood life. Until now. That's how human being understands life. However, technocracy destroys the faith in life, and the machines take the lead, ignoring the process of living and dying. And this is why, in this system, they do not need children. So this system is childrenless, if you study it better. And that's why this system glorifies death. This is one of the reasons. So what do we have? We have genetic engineering, climate engineering, bioengineering. Everything else they come up with should create a world where people will be chipped, will have smart homes, they will have antennas on their head, but they will not have food, they will not have water, they won't see the sun, they won't even breathe, they will have computers, and so on and so on. So how long you think this project will last? I guess it will last very short. It would last very short. Part of their job is, of course, cloning people and do various genetic experiments. And let me remind you also that Mircea Eliade, in his book, says that monsters appear at the end of the world as they were at the beginning of the world. However, that what is being prepared is not just technocracy. It is much worse. It is direct continuation of Nazism and fascism, and I know very well what I'm saying now. And the picture is really scary, and it is becoming clearer to many of us. It is clear that the process of eugenics continues. Eugenics in English, I think they say. Concentration camps and images of torture of people in the Second World War irresistibly reminds us to these images that appear today. Just reflectors lights are now these antennas that they are putting for the speed internet. And also this so-called hygienic treatment of people, which is obligatory today, is very scary. So is the plan to expand the concentration camps to the whole world, to have everyone under the spotlight, similar to the reflectors light that were in concentration camps, to have limited movement of all, as it happened in spring? Is it the plan to inject substances into the human body against the will of that human body and to make experiments as it was in concentration camps? Is it possible that they want to create a world with no freedom, no creativity, without man, perhaps without plants, maybe without animals even? Because they pollute machines, because they have emotions and that's what they're bad. Is that the plan, I'm asking? Of course it is. If you don't see it, I guess there are many people who do see it. Schools are also being abolished in a way, or they're preparing that. It's interesting that history is changed for them, and future is planned for them. They are even starting wars in today's time with the idea to try their modern technology. And at the same time, they are talking about human rights and democracy. This is the world we live in. Fascism or Nazism, let's say, is continuing to work today. Even it has been transformed in today's time. And those who are doing that, they are using NATO army. They are working to many so-called international organizations and non-government organizations, and they are speaking through American deep state. These are those structures. If the machine is to rule a man, then it is clear that the basics of technocracy is the hatred of God and its opposition to God's divine or universal laws. You can understand that as you want. Somebody says God, somebody says universal law, but it's fine. All of this is fine. Everything is very similar to what was during the Russian Revolution at the beginning, at the last century. Now it is spreading, those ideas spreading to West. The symbolism is very similar. Just now it is even rich with the experience of the Second World War and concentration camps. And the hatred toward God is here obvious. So the world is full of materialists. They can be communists, capitalists, they can be Western scientists. And unfortunately, many believers from many religions, they're also based on materialistic way of thinking, and they're creating that what is happening today, unknowingly often. Even if they're talking today about the informational universe, or how it is in English, and they do not talk about black matter, they're still materialists, and that's the trouble. Let me remind you that in my video about the year of the metal mouse that I recorded at the beginning of the year, and I spoke about Chinese New Year according to Chinese calendar, I mentioned that this is the year of metal, so metal rules. And such years are very dangerous because metal cuts wood, and wood is the symbol of life and growth. So this year we see it not only symbolically, but also in fact. In many parts of the world, they're cutting the trees, they're changing climate, and this is how actually the metal element works. I see technocracy as a continuation and complement to plutocracy. At the same time, technocracy for me is the continuation of fascism and Nazism. It does not have to be by definition, but it is so in today's time. There is a good book in Czech language, From the Origin of Language to the Race, written by an author. His name is Budil, where the author shows how the search for spiritual knowledge in the East influenced the ideas of Aryanism in the Nazi Germany. And what is happening now is the continuation of that for sure. We can learn that from the symbols that appear in today's time. And eugenics is being carried out, and carried out for the most of humanity. That's what they are doing basically today. The selection of people is not the same in the Second World War, but the idea is the same. Unfortunately, I have to say that. This terrible arrogance that stands behind those modern plutocrats who are using modern technology says everything about them. According to Chinese philosophy of Taoism, when arrogance appears, it is the end of rule. So when someone is so powerful, then he gets lost in that power and forgets about others, then his end comes. In 2023, Pluto will enter the sign of Aquarius, and the plutocrats want to transfer their rule in a new way. Pluto in Aquarius can certainly control the masses as they want to create it, no problem for that. But everything will depend actually on the level of human consciousness and the process of transformation of the planet on which we live. Whether such a thing will be possible, or we will create a new world and new science in the accelerated process of evolution of human consciousness that will respect divine laws and enable man to live in a new way through science and as a spiritual being, remains to be seen. Now everything is very critical. I am shooting this video in the summer of 2020, when the world is under great pressure, like a pressure pot. So there is a lot of pressure, and it is necessarily for polarization to happen. The world has always been divided into two parts, so no one will ever be able to rule the whole world. Just would be fine to live in the world where those two sides are supplemented, are complemented to each other, as Taoism teaches. For now, that's impossible, but let's hope it will be one day. But what can we say to technocrats is that actually life is a game and not a program. So the sun plays and thus allows everything to live and grow on Earth. And as the sun plays every day, that's how human beings play in a way. Human being plays in a different ways. Also, when he gives birth to children, or when he creates whatever else, and that's thanks to that he has this divine creative potential in himself. So we create in various ways, especially with our thoughts. So it depends on us whether we will believe that this plutocracy, as they want to establish it, is necessary to create or not. If we laugh at them and wave our hand, in the sense that their program is just unfortunate utopia, and we start to create our new world that will be rich, in which knowledge and respect for both spiritual and material world will rule. If we believe that the world will be better and better with people who love each other, then their project will be just a failed version of reality that may exist in one of their worlds, but not in ours. So if we unite like that the world will be ours and not theirs, regardless of the terribly high frequency weapons they have, then everything will be different. Our association should happen at the level of consciousness. We should meet in one of the dimensions of this reality that exists and is open to every blessed person, where everyone can enter spontaneously by awakening. The laws of the universe do not work by changing humanity at once, but by changing the consciousness of each individual separately. So we change and we meet there. That's the idea that I'm suggesting. I made a video about Saturn in Aquarius. You will find it on YouTube. And my motto for this transit is me and them, or us and them. You know, this is what we need to learn something about, especially in the year 21 and 22. Technocrats, as we say, do not acknowledge God like many other scientists and politicians. But actually this Aquarius age, if we speak about that, is not an atheistic time. The age to come is not the age without God, we can say. Just this age changes the concept of God for universal consciousness and changes the concept of the soul for consciousness. And we already see and feel that our lives are going to have the spiritual lives are going to have this new paradigm. Although we live in a time of dangerous experiments, we should not be afraid that technocrats will win. Firstly, because the world will always be polarized, regardless their goal and their aspirations to rule the whole world. And secondly, because the technocratic system cannot come to life because, as we see, it denies life. Therefore, it would mean actually the end of humanity. And whether we will continue to exist or not does not depend on the size of their antenna, but on the divine will and divine love. And that's all what I wanted to tell you about technocracy. If you want to schedule personal consultations with me, you can do it, no problem. All contacts are under this video on YouTube, and you can also check my pages. The name is symbolicthinking.net. You will see there that I offer some products in English less than in other languages, but I also offer different types of consultancy, and everything else I do you will find there. I'm very much involved in Thetahealing and Feng Shui, and if you want, you can also order this type of consultancy with me. I apologize to everyone that I did not record the video for August. I did not have time. Hopefully in autumn I will work regularly as before. If you like this video, forward it, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and thank you very much for that in advance. Until next time, I wish you to feel love in your heart, to feel love every day of your life. Wish you to adore yourself and all your creations and this world, the same as muses were adoring Apollo and his people.